it was really hard going out in public sometimes because I knew that people would be staring at me. And I was used to it. But I remember in college, when I got to Florida State, obviously in Florida, dead heat of summer, I started wearing hoodies outside to class. And I remember just sweating. And I'm like, why am I doing this to myself? And I'm like, well, I just don't want, I mean, Florida State has 1 million people there, you know, compared to my 50 graduates. And so it was really different. I didn't know anyone there. So I kind of felt like I had to protect myself. And for me to protect myself, it was just to not show my arm because I didn't want to have to explain it. And so I would wear hoodies in the dead heat of summer, and I would just, it was miserable.
Yeah.
And I almost, in my mind, was like, I'd rather be miserable than have to explain my arm.
Did that take a toll on you? And did you have dark nights as a freshman that's trying to make it on a team that's really, really good, competing for national championships? And you talk about wearing a sweatshirt when it's 100 degrees outside. Why do you think you did that? Was there anxiety? Was there depression building up inside of you?
There was 100% anxiety. I really struggled when I got there because for two reasons. As a player and as a person. So, you know, again, when I was in high school, I didn't have to explain my arm to anyone. I was just a good soccer player. When I got to Florida State, things started to shift to only really being about my arm as a soccer player. And I've told this story before, but we went to the College Cup, which is the biggest thing you can do in college soccer. And we were headed towards the national championship, and there was a media day. And I got picked. I was a freshman, and I got picked with all the seniors, these like unbelievable players.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my gosh, like no freshman ever gets picked to do media day. I was so excited. I remember telling my parents I'm in with like the big girls, like they're awesome. And we went there, and every single one of their questions was about soccer, and every single one of mine was about my arm. So that at that point I realized maybe I wasn't known as a good soccer player. Maybe I was just like, maybe I was here because I had one arm and it was a good story. And I definitely had thoughts like that before, where maybe I was picked to do things because it was a good story. And maybe not as much because they thought I was really good at soccer, or they thought this, that, and the other, whatever I was doing. And so I struggle with that a little bit, especially meeting new people and meeting other athletes. I didn't want the other athletes to look down on me and be like, oh, you're just here because, you know, they're pitying you, or it looks good for the university. I wanted to just be there because I was a good soccer player. And I remember struggling a lot my freshman year, trying to make sure I fit in, and not just, you know, when you go to college, you just want to fit in general.
Yeah.
Then I was thinking, okay, I want to fit in as a person, but I also want to fit in and not stand out because of my arm. So I felt like I already had kind of a struggle against me that I had to deal with.
Yeah.
And that freshman year, the first summer, I met a lot of great people, but I definitely remember meeting other athletes and wondering if I was good enough and if I was there for all the right reasons. And I struggled with that.
Was there chances for you to talk to somebody on staff? Or, I mean, the stigma, obviously, with mental health at that time, I think we're about the same age. Like, you didn't talk about it in school. You didn't talk about it around sports. You just rub some dirt on it, go out there and play. But when you're struggling like that, was there a want to talk to somebody about it? Did you call your mom? Did you talk to anybody about that feeling of being anxious?
No. So yeah, and I agree. Like, when we grew up, it was kind of just like, get on with it.
Yeah.
You know, you think about it and you're like, all right, like, next thing, what's next?
Yeah.
Obviously Florida State, they have amazing resources. So I could have talked to anyone. They offered to anybody, any athlete. You could always talk to somebody. But for me, yeah, I mean, my parents, I was probably the closest to my parents, and I felt the most comfortable with them.
Yeah.
So things like that. I remember calling my mom after the interview situation with the other girls and just being like so upset about it. And that's when kind of she changed my mindset. She was like, you know, you actually have a platform that no one else has. So you could turn it and flip your script into something that it could be an amazing opportunity to tell your story. And it could be amazing for these kids who are missing one arm, who maybe feel sad, anxious, depressed, to realize that there's somebody out there that is following their dreams and that they can do that too. And so she was definitely one of the ones that changed my mindset towards it. So I'd call them for things like that. But honestly, I thought in my mind that I had one arm and no one I knew in my life had one arm. It's almost like I felt like no one would really understand. Because they don't have people staring at them everywhere they go. They don't have people looking at them in the grocery store. And sometimes it was exhausting. I either had to hide my arm or just allow it to happen. And I realized that I actually started feeling bad for the people I was with. If someone was walking with me in the mall, like one of my friends, I almost felt awkward for them because I know they saw people staring at me. Yeah. And I kind of started to have these feelings like, and feel bad for them instead of like, feeling, I didn't have any toll on me. I was like, oh, I always get stared at. But like the people I was around, I felt awkward for them. I was like, I don't want them to feel awkward around me because I know they see people staring at me. And I think that was something that was really hard as well.
It feels like you growing up, like it wasn't even after some hurdles, obviously as a kid, 5, 6, 7 years old, the monkey bars, learning how to play sports, and you played everything from basketball, tennis, obviously soccer is what you stood out in and you pursued as your career now, playing professionally. But it feels like you grew to be comfortable in your own skin, like a lot of people have to. But then once you got to college and adult life, you almost had to do that again. What made you comfortable to not wear those sweatshirts, to not worry about if people are looking at you?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. That actually is my story. I was uncomfortable with it in high school, became comfortable. Uncomfortable in college, became comfortable. And then in the pros, uncomfortable and became, it's almost like it's part of a totem pole kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like, like you make it and then you're a low man on the totem pole and you make it. And so that's kind of how I felt with my story. So for me in college, I think the biggest thing is after my freshman year when I kind of established myself as a good soccer player.
Yeah.
Because, you can do all these things in high school in the soccer world and nobody cares when you get to college.
Yeah.
They're just worried about winning a national championship and not getting their position taken. So it's kind of a dog-eat-dog world in the college soccer world. So I think that, I realized nobody actually cared about my arm in a good way.
Yes.
And I realized that actually one of my teammates who ended up being a captain, Dagny, she was from Iceland, but she came up to me and she was like, I just had a reporter talk to me for 5 minutes to try and explain who had one hand on our team. And she's like, for the life of me I didn't realize it was you. I could not remember you had one hand. And that kind of changed my mindset because I realized nobody actually cares. People are going through their own things. They don't actually care about your situation in a good way. They're not worried about what you can and can't do. And honestly, she forgot I had one hand because she was like, you can do everything. So she's like, I could not. The person finally had to tell me, Carson's the one with one hand on your team. And she's like, for the life of me, I just couldn't remember. And so that kind of changed my mindset because I realized no one cares. Yeah. Everyone has their own stories, their own journeys. And as long as you're playing good soccer, then that's all they really care about.